if you're having trouble with the audio, try dialing in instead of using the VoIP connection. It's probably be easier that way, although you won't have the advantage of seeing the slide deck, but it will be available along with the recording of this presentation on the EDUCAUSE ITSM wiki site in about 5 business days. I'm going to put everyone on mute, and if you have questions, please enter them in the chat window. Please use your name followed by the institution so I know where you're hailing from. With that, I want to welcome Sarah Topham to this presentation and thank her for being our speaker today. Sarah has a BA in Business Management from Franklin Marshall College and a Lean Six Sigma Green Belt and Black Belt certification from the Center for Quality and Applied Statistics at her institution. She spent over 14 years in the service industry serving as a business and process analyst in information technology. She joined the RIT Information Technology Services Department back in 2012 and has facilitated the implementation of the ITS change management process, the foundation for the ITS work request process and other improvement efforts for ITS and RIT. She serves as a Lean coach for ITS, a mentor for the Lean Six Sigma candidates, and is a contributor to the book Run, Grow, Transform, Integrating Business and Lean IT, written by Steve Bell. I will now turn it over to Sarah.
Great. Thank you, Mitch. Can everybody hear me? Mitch, I'm hoping you can hear me.
Yeah, I can hear you. Yeah, everyone's on mute, so hopefully
Okay,
they can hear
you. All right. So I'm going to share my screen. Thank you for having me. I appreciate the opportunity.
I see your slide deck, Sarah. So.
You do?
Yes.
Okay. You see it better than I do. There we go. Okay. So thanks for having me. I know there was some inquiries which started that triggered this presentation. My hope is that everybody will be able to learn something that you can apply to your institution, help you move yourselves forward. So what I'm going to go through today, give you a little bit about RIT, a little bit of background on Lean thinking and Kaizen, if you're not familiar with it, and then more specifically tell you about our journey and how we use Kaizen to create the foundation for our service catalog, and then give you some resources if you want some more information, and then as Mitch said, we'll have some time for Q&A as well. So a little bit about RIT. We're located in Rochester, New York. We have almost 4,000 faculty and staff, about 18,000 students. We're comprised of 9 different colleges, including most notable sometimes for us is the National Technical Institute for the Deaf. And then ITS itself,
that's funky.
We have 120 employees. We do also have student workers and co-ops, as I'm sure many of you do. We're structured into 4 primary organizations. We have application development, infrastructure operations, project management office, and then support. We do also have a student IT office. It's a microcosm of IT that's run and managed by students. We also have what's called campus IT. There are a lot of colleges that employ their own IT folks, so the campus IT organization is how we connect with them. And we do provide some dedicated support for specific colleges, so ITS staff that are dedicated to those specific colleges. And because we're talking about service requests and tickets and things along those lines, I wanted to give you an idea. We have an average ticket volume of about 4,500 tickets per month. So that gives you an idea about our volume. So that said, let's get started. So there's a lot of standards on how to do a service catalog, how to think about your work. There's a lot of methodologies, a lot of practices, be it ITIL or whatever it is. And we did not want to be prescriptive about how we looked at our work. So we really, this quote is one of my favorites, just when you think you know something, you have to look at it in another way. So we didn't want to just adopt something quote unquote canned. We wanted to make sure it was something that would work for our customers, which meant we really had to think differently about the work and about how we do our work. So one of the things that we keep in the forefront of our minds is this concept of the people, process, and technology, and I'm sure many of you are familiar with that, and we do often think about it. In the book Lean IT, Steve Bell and Mike Orzen put together an illustration that to me really helped us think more deliberately about how we can think differently. So, for example, looking at the people and technology without the process, it's one of my favorites. There's automated chaos and confusion, and you get bad customer service. If you have people and process without technology, there's frustration and inefficiency. In the ITS world, that's generally not where things go. Technology is ever present, often in the forefront in terms of solutions. But the bottom one, if you have technology and process without people, you can see that there's alienation and turnover, underutilized systems, which in this case was really adoption. If we didn't really engage the people or our customers, we were really concerned that the adoption wouldn't come to be. So to hit the sweet spot, we looked at all three of these facets, and we continue to look at them when we have different opportunities for improvement to make sure we're really engaging all three of these components to get us to that healthy sweet spot. So a little bit about lean thinking. In case you're not familiar with it, there's a lot of principles, but there's three basic tenets that we applied and continue to apply here. One is lean thinking always starts with the outside-in perspective. It's from the point of view of your customer. And it's important when you're thinking of the point of view of your customer that you don't assume anything and really ask to learn. So really soliciting from the customers, really what is their perspective? And then understanding how are your processes designed to meet those needs. So how well are you organized or aligned to meet those needs from how your customer perceives what they're looking for to get from you? And then once you do that, you can really look and see how healthy are your processes, how well are you meeting those needs, where are there opportunities for improvement, which of course in the process improvement world, there's always opportunities to keep improving. So we applied this framework, these three different components, when we started looking at what we called creating our quote unquote work request categories or leading to that service catalog. So to give you a little bit of background, beyond that, for the work that we actually did, I was charged with fixing the service request process, which I'm sure there were certainly opportunities, and not to argue that there weren't. The question really was, what does this really mean? What are the opportunities? What should be fixed? And if we didn't clarify that, there was a risk of people having different expectations, which could lead to various outcomes, some desirable, some not desirable. So we always looked at our current state first, and we said, with the service request process, what are the current problems? And we had low customer satisfaction with the ticketing. We had a high rate of escalated complaints. In other words, something wasn't working according to the process. It got escalated to more important people. And we also had a lack of ability to really measure our fulfillment performance. How long did it take to do this body of work? How many people were involved? What's a reasonable duration for the customer to expect? How do we communicate to the customer about it? So those were some of the problems that we needed to go after. We also looked at then saying, where are we now? And I spent a lot of time talking to folks in ITS specifically, and to uncover that resources from all areas of ITS are involved with service requests. It was not just a service desk or a support undertaking. We didn't have a really consistent understanding of a service request. Again, there's some prescriptive definitions, but really what did that mean to us in terms of our work? It wasn't crystallized across all of ITS. We had a lot of different mechanisms for tickets. People could use our ticketing tool. They could send an email. They could send an email which created a ticket. They could do what we called a drive-by. They could do a phone call. So a lot of different ways that the work came in. We do use footprints for our ticketing tool. And then also in terms of our service request processes overall, we're very focused on team performance, or organizationally, how was each team or sub-team functioning. And then our metrics, again, they were primarily categorical. How many of what type of work did we get? But even that was tricky. It was often how many tickets does so-and-so have in their queue, which again is a people and an organization focus as opposed to the work and what the customers were looking for. So that's what started from quote unquote fix the service request process. To give you an idea of what that looks like visually, this was our current process at the time, our prior process. So you'll see the work came in, various mechanisms, and the way it was perceived, as you can see, it's organizationally. That work came in and went to a certain team or a certain group of people. And then it did work its way through the system to get then distributed to the folks who could actually fulfill the work. But again, it was very focused on our organization, not the work itself, and certainly not the customer. So what was happening is customers, many of them were learning our organization to then know how to get their work done, which is not the desired state. Customers shouldn't have to be IT specialists or to fully understand our organization to get their work done. So overall, we had to fix our processes and how we were fulfilling the work. We were certainly getting it done. I don't want to imply in any way, shape, or form that the work was not getting done. It was just how could we do it better? The challenge is we couldn't fix the process until we knew what the work was. So we needed to better define the work itself. And that meant we had to ask our customers what they expect of us, and specifically how they define or understand the work that they ask of us. Again, we don't want them to have to learn IT. We want them to tell us, how do you see what you ask of us? How do you define it? So as a result of that, when we looked at the lean thinking, we went from the fix the service request process, again, from the outside in perspective, who are our customers? What do they want? What are they expecting? Then asking ourselves, how are we aligned? We knew we weren't aligned very well around the work because we were more organizationally focused, as I showed you in the previous slide. Do we understand how the work varies? There's a tremendous amount of work that happens in ITS. Not everybody sees all of it. Once we could do that, we could then look at how effectively we were performing against that purpose, or how well our processes were working. So what was started as fix the service request process became a whole work request and triage Kaizen. And I wanted to frame this up for you again, because I'm going to talk specifically how we defined that work, but I just want to make sure you understand it was part of a bigger endeavor. But again, we couldn't define the workflow unless we actually could define the work itself. So that's how we pursued a Kaizen to help us along the way. So a Kaizen, if you're not familiar, it's a process improvement tool. It's definitively defined to very aggressively solve problems and to eliminate waste. Eliminating waste is a phrase in Lean. There's 7 standard wastes when you look at a process. That's something, if you're not familiar, it's very easy to find out about. So another way I describe a Kaizen is Winnie the Pooh, a classic. I love this. Here comes Edward Bear now, down the stairs behind Christopher Robin. Bump, bump, bump on the back of his head. It is, as far as he knows, the only way of coming downstairs. He's sure there must be a better way, if only he could stop bumping for a moment to think about it. So that's what this type of event does. It allows you to stop and focus on the problem. I'll get into a little more detail, but Kaizen events are 2.5 days where people focus on a problem. Depending upon your industry, they might be longer or shorter. In the service industry where I've been, 2.5 days is plenty of time. It's hard work. People are brain tired by the end, but it's a very effective way to solve a problem. Some people often ask, how could you get resources committed for 2.5 days? And really, when you use a Kaizen, you're using it for improvements that are of a larger scale. And when you step back and understand your current state and understand how long the problems are languishing and how much waste is pervasive in the organization, it's generally not as hard to convince folks that that's the right way to go. Because otherwise your alternative is to keep chipping away at the problem, and you're not necessarily going to solve it. And it's going to just, again, it's going to languish, and there's more waste that's going to go on and on. So a Kaizen helps you stop. So there's certain circumstances when to use a Kaizen. It varies depending upon what you're doing, but it's always, when we say obvious waste sources, in other words, it's a larger problem. Like I said, it's fairly pervasive, it's prevalent, happens quite frequently. Have to be very clear on what you're going to solve for. The risk should be relatively minimal. And for us, these last 2 bullets were particularly important for us when it came to work requests and fixing the service request process. We had to do something fairly quickly. This could not be chipped away at like 1 ticket type at a time or 1 team at a time. We had to really look at this holistically and get some pretty quick results. We also really needed momentum because we knew this was just the start. To understand and define our work from a customer perspective, then look at the flow of the work, there's a lot more that's going to come. So we wanted to be able to gain that momentum. And again, with our customers, we wanted to build some credibility in the fact that we understand their perspective and we're trying to do our best for them. So the Kaizen itself, again, ours are 2.5 days. It is defined as a short burst of intense activity. Again, defining that goal. Action over analysis is really important. The team is tasked with a specific problem to go after, and there are different tools and methods you can use, but you need the team to make decisions. It is not analysis paralysis. I have been known to do rock, paper, scissors. If a team cannot decide between two options, you're much better off picking something, designing it into a process, talking it through. If 2 hours later you have to change it, you have to change it. But 2 steps forward and 1 step back is better than no steps forward. So it's a very action-oriented event. And then there's also daily progress reviews because your targets include very specific metrics, if not just your objectives in general. So each day, at the end of the day, where are we? What do we need to do? Are we on track to make sure that you're actually making the progress that you need to make? Within the Kaizen, there's specific roles. We have 2 to 3 sponsors. They're usually senior leaders. As you can see, they have certain responsibilities really to support the team. They are always visible. They're very supportive. They're at the kickoff, they're at the daily updates, and they're at the report as the end. They are not involved in any other way. They are frankly not allowed to be there in any other way. They are empowering this team to come together to solve the problems that they have defined. The team consists of team leaders and team members. So the team leaders have a slightly more responsibility than the rest of the team members. And a lot of it is just having the team work together, helping them encourage ideas, help making sure everybody's engaged. But they're also responsible for checking on the progress, making sure that the team is moving ahead as intended. They do update the sponsors, but they also are responsible for the follow-through work to make sure that any work that gets done afterwards is appropriately delegated and happening. The team members always includes customers. Our particular event for this, we had a total of 17 people on the team. Generally do not go any higher than that would be my recommendation. It becomes a little bit daunting to manage, but you always include customers. They're also always the people who actually do the work. Okay, this is not a top-down management deciding what should happen and telling people how to solve the problem. These are folks that need to know what the work is being done, and they are encouraged to come up with the solutions. They're encouraged to ask why, to learn why things are happening. And then one other thing is they're very critical in communicating to others that they represent. As you can imagine, customers across your campus, you probably have hundreds, right? So identifying these team members, they are responsible for communicating to their constituents, representing folks in their organizations. They're also key to communicating back to those folks. After talking through and coming up with a solution and improvement, it's their responsibility to then come back to their teams and help communicate it, be a resource if people have questions. So there are also folks that you want a little bit of leadership, willing to change, and some leadership characteristics. The other thing that's important to note between the team leaders and the team members as a whole, there's one person, one voice, and no rank. So even though your team leaders may be managers, once you're in the room, it's all one person, one voice. You may have people that report to each other. Doesn't matter. One person, one voice. So it allows everybody to be engaged, to focus on the problem, and again, move away from the organization thinking, the org chart perspective, to thinking about we're here all to solve this problem. So let's work together to do that. So we have a tool, we have multiple tools we use, but we have something called an area profile. And this helps us for Kaizen to actually bound the problem. It is specifically one page, and it cannot get into teeny tiny font. It is specifically one page. You should be able to have all these facets on one page. If you cannot, then you probably have too much that you're going after. So you can see we've got the event description. For us, it was designing a standard process that's used by external customers to request work of ITS and successfully distributes that request to the appropriate resource. Like I said, we had some workflow. It wasn't just defining the work. We have very specific objectives. You can see we've got some metrics in there. We also have the exclusions and assumptions. We took incidents outside of this effort. We would certainly look at current processes. And as you can see, our other assumption was this was providing a foundation or contribution to the creating of the service catalog. So this event was not create a service catalog. It was, remember, fix the service request process, which came down to let's understand what the work is and how it's received and making sure it gets to that, what we call the initial recipient. If you look on our dates, this is indeed when we did this 2 years ago. It's 2.5 days. And then our team, different team members. We've got our team leads in the bottom of that box. In this case, our customers were 25% of our team. So we had 4 people. And on the one hand, that seems like a very small number of people, but we were very thoughtful about how this came together. We looked at our frequent requesters. Well, first of all, we took students off. Students are actually fairly compliant. And this was more we were able to look at the analysis if we remove students and said, who are our frequent requesters? Which organizations submit the most requests to us? So that was one of our considerations. We also wanted to make sure they were folks with whom we had a good relationship. And what we mean by that is not just they would tell us how well we were doing things, but who could safely tell us what was not working and who could really express what they do want and being able to participate in that. We also wanted folks that could be that champion for others. So you can see one of the teams was human resources. Julie was there from human resources. She's not the only one in HR, but she was able to represent the rest of her group. She was a leader in her organization, so she could solicit input from them, but she could also communicate back. And again, we wanted to make sure that we had somewhat of a fair representation. So it turns out for us, we had FMS, which is our facility maintenance folks, student affairs, human resources, and then that campus IT organization I spoke of earlier. That was the majority of where our requests came from. And so those were the folks that we invited to be on the team. And the remainder were IT people that we made sure we had somebody from each of our organizations, because again, we wanted to make sure service requests permeate ITS. They're not just a service desk event or responsibility. So it was within this event that we defined the work and our work request types. So how did we actually do that? So we had a few steps, and I will tell you it took a matter of hours. So I think that's part of the reason for this conversation. So first thing we did was the team was asked in a pre-Kaizen session, they were asked to identify the different types of work. Meaning, if you're in ITS, what are all the types of work that people ask you to do? And if you're a customer, what types of work do you ask ITS to do for you? Okay. This was not expected to be a long task, and it didn't take anybody more than 2 hours. Some folks did it meeting with their teams. Some folks just asked for an email or a list, just like give me a brain dump of everything you do. One of the challenges was we wanted to make sure we had an informative level of detail without being excruciatingly painful, and that took a little bit of conversation. But for example, we did not want something like we maintain infrastructure or install hardware. We wanted upgrade Red Hat servers or install printers or install scanners. So finding that level of informative detail was a little bit tricky, but we wanted to make sure it could eradicate our assumptions and still be informative to help identify the work. So that led us to 1,100 different items, which was great. So from there, everybody brought their list to another meeting that we had before the event itself to clarify and revise those different lists. As you can imagine, there were some redundancies. When a customer listed something that they request of ITS, people in ITS had it on their list as something that people requested of them. But what we did was they took the 1,100 items on their list and I paired them together, team members, with somebody not in your own organization. And they read their lists aloud to each other. It seems tedious, but it served 2 purposes. One was the person who created the list had to read it aloud, so they had to hear it. And then the second purpose was for the other individual to ask for clarification and to say, what does that mean? I don't understand that. Is that really the right verb? Is that really what you're trying to say? So they then revised their lists. And then we came back as a full group and everybody read their lists again, and we were able to eliminate even more duplicates. So for example, many different organizations across ITS grant what we call account access to different applications, but that was then rolled into account access. So that was considered a duplicate, although we did retain the details for later. So this activity got us from 1,100 items down to 803. And again, there were multiple purposes of that. One was it really illustrated that there is a whole lot of work ITS does. No single person could have come up with this list. And then it allows us to really understand where we have overlap and activity within ITS. It also ensured that every area of ITS was represented. Again, everybody knew of their own little world. We wanted to make sure we understood holistically what happens in ITS and make sure that we brought everybody in so all their voices were heard. So again, that's why team members were responsible for representing these organizations. That's why they went back to their folks, because even those team members certainly could not have come up with those lists. So once we had down to 803, then the list was provided to me, and I created another list, reduced it down to internal-only requests. When the teams had created the list in the first two steps, we did identify which ones were external, meaning somebody outside of ITS could ask you for this, and one, or if it was internal only or both. If they were internal only, in other words, those requests that only our ITS folks ask of each other, those were taken off the table for now, because again, our focus was on external requests of ITS. That didn't take a whole lot of time. Okay, it took 3 hours, but that brought us down to 617 items. At this point, the team did not see the list again until the event itself. Within the Kaizen, we did something called an Affinity. I'll talk in a little bit more detail about that. But what that is, it's a mechanism to sort a whole lot of items into like grouping. So I copied every item, all 617, onto sticky notes. It's important to understand an affinity exercise is a low-tech exercise. You do not want to be distracted by technology. You want people to be focused on the content. So that allowed these items to be ready for the team during the event itself. So at this point, they've spent some time preparing, and then in the event itself, we went through all 617 items, and we ended up with 16 work request types. So that within the 2.5 days of the Kaizen was about 4 hours. So if you're not familiar with an affinity, or even if you are, there's some variations we applied to make this happen. Again, an affinity is used to organize and summarize groupings of information to understand really either what a problem is or what you need to address. There's different methods for it, but it's essentially a basic 5-step process. The first is always brainstorm or list, get all the information that you want to be sorted. Again, for us, because we didn't want to just be prescriptive, what is all the work we're talking about? That was our list, and it was a big list. But we had to gather everything we're talking about in terms of the work, and again, we whittled it down to what external customers would ask. Write everything on a Post-it note, and then essentially you're going to randomly put them on a large flat surface. We had a wall. But you want to basically make everything visible to the team, so then the group can move them around into these like groups. Okay. Couple different things that are really important about this. You'll see in step number 4, it happens in silence. The team does not talk while they're sorting. The reason for that is if you're not talking, everyone has to engage with their own thinking. If somebody moves a Post-it from one area to another area, people have to stop and think for themselves. Why is it going there? Oh, that might be interesting. Oh, I see where they're going with that, or I'm not quite sure. It also helps often in a group, there's some more dominant voices or some more experts. Certainly in our case, that was true with the work and being ITS folks. Again, how they thought of work, they would gravitate toward what they know, or they might discuss. And sometimes that discussion can really dominate the thinking. It also really ensures that people that are not very vocal still participate and still have a voice. So for ours, as it says in the third bullet, we didn't have 17 people sorting at once. I split people into 4 groups. We had team A, B, C, D. Every team had a customer, because again, this was from the customer's perspective. How do they see the work that we do? And it was not organizationally focused. So we had each team rotate through. I had the sticky notes on very large Post-it papers. They started with about 4 Post-it pages. As soon as they made it through, I brought out more, because sorting 617 out of the gate is a bit tricky. But every team had customers on it. Ultimately, after they were sorted, about halfway through, I changed it. So there was one team that was only customers, and they sorted the whole time. And then the ITS teams rotated through. That allowed us to really keep that voice of the customer and that customer perspective up front. So they were the ones primarily sorting and therefore defining the groups. When you do this, sometimes post-its move back and forth, back and forth and back and forth. Just create a second one and put it in both groups. It'll work itself out with the discussions later. And keep in mind also, there's always some outliers, and that's okay. Either they're actually out of scope, or as you progress through, they do get absorbed into other groups as the team progresses. So once the group has stopped sorting, then you stop, and everybody can talk, because the idea is to then discuss and define those groups. So again, focusing on the work, having people think and decide how this work is associated, and then defining the groups. For us, that's how we ended up with 16 work request types. So to give you a visual, this is what it looked like as the team started. Top left is when they first started, and then to the right, a little bit more and more. Team picture on the bottom, but the light yellow stickies are all the different items. The bright yellow stickies are the titles. Those are the headers for those groupings. So once they got through sorting, this is what we ended up with. These are our standard work request types. Now, as you read through them, they're probably very similar to different service catalogs, right? And that's fine. Again, we didn't want to be prescriptive. We wanted the folks to have that sense of ownership, have those definitions. There were a lot of great discussions on how this came about. And the other important note is this is written from the perspective of the customer. So for example, we have email management. For some people in ITS, they wouldn't call it email, they would call it exchange. Well, our customers don't know that it's exchange, nor should they need to know that it's exchange. To them, it's email. Instead of a software install, it was computer and mobile device. I need something put on my laptop, right? Whatever that may be, but they're not going to know what software versus not. So a couple key points. Again, we focused on the work, not the silos. Again, the customer language. And this was that piece of involving those people to get that ownership, which leads to the adoption. Definitely many of the request types, they have subcategories. I'll show you an example in just a moment. And this was foundational now for us to understand our process metrics. It's not how a person or a team is doing, but it is how well are we fulfilling web requests? How well are we fulfilling account management requests? So this was a significant learning for a lot of the IT folks to switch from their technology and what they know in terms of the details of the work to really think about how a customer sees IT. So since that time, we actually have 19 total, but this is an example of our, we put them into Drupal pages, so you can see this as account management requests related to the creation, modification, or deletion of RIT computer accounts, application accounts, or service accounts. That definition came up based on the cluster of stickies that came together under account management. So again, we have a website for submission. They automatically create tickets with the categories automatically assigned to them. And again, we've had very little revision. We have had some additions as new work has been identified. So obviously there's more than just in this screenshot. And then to give you an example, this is the account management request type. And as I said, there's detailed information underneath. So within account management, you have to pick what application or system are you requesting access for, and what is the request? Is it a new account, existing account, deleting an account, password reset? So that begins our workflow, and based on that type of work and the criteria that you complete, that then drives the work request to the correct organization that can then move it and promote it to the next stage for fulfillment. So back again to this thinking. So we really started from the outside-in perspective of our customer. One of those three tenets, we engaged our customers to fully understand, ask them how they view the work. That's allowed us to then understand how we need to align to meet those needs. And now we're in a position where we can actually take, quote unquote, take these steps to see how well we're actually working to meet those customers' needs. So those are how we applied the tenets of Lean and how we actually used it within a Kaizen event to define all those workflows. So a few final thoughts for you. Kaizens are great. They're a fantastic tool. They're very powerful. There is a lot of lean thinking that goes around it that is foundational. Again, I can't say this enough for service catalog development. Talk about the work, what your organization does. Make no assumptions about it. Dig into it. Find out about it so then you can really address it. Always assemble a team of people who actually do the work and make sure that that team is empowered and they know and they understand the problem that they're to solve for and they're empowered to do it. With a lean leader, there's a lot of tools in our toolbox that we can use to pull out to make sure that happens. And definitely challenging IT folks to think about how the customers see the work can be hard. There's certainly some people that say, well, our customers should just know this is how we do it. Nope, we have to work on that a little bit. And we've seen tremendous strides in that thinking here. One question I do get asked fairly frequently is how many Kaizen events can you do? In my experience in a service industry, it's 1 to 2 a year, because these are very broad. These are comprehensive problems you're trying to solve, and an organization needs to make some change, adapt, and then move on. So it's not a high-frequency event, but it certainly can get you a tremendous amount of benefit in a short period of time. And as Mitch implied or mentioned at the beginning, we've used the same Kaizen model to implement our change management process that has also been able to be implemented and sustained. So last slide I'll share with you, and then we can go to some questions if there are. These are some resources. If you're not familiar with LEI, the Lean Enterprise Institute, they're down in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Fantastic organization. All kinds of resources are available there. Learning to See is a terrific book. Steve Bell, again, the author of Lean IT, was his first book. Run, Grow, Transform. I did contribute a very, very small amount, but it's a fantastic book. That actually is very applicable to this conversation. There's a section, a chapter that's a contribution by Troy Dumoulin from Pink Elephant that talks about process, ITSM, Lean, and how to think about it. And then Toyota Kata is a fantastic book. And Gemba Walks is a very easy read. It's a series of short stories about Lean and how you can see Lean almost everywhere you go and process improvement. So with that, hopefully it's been informative. Mitch, I'll invite you if there's any questions. I can certainly do my best to answer them.
Well, thank you, Sarah. It was a great presentation. Yeah, I just want to encourage the group. Now's the time to start submitting your questions in the chat window. I'll read the first ones coming in. Please put your institution followed by your name or your name followed by institution so I can give your institution credit. As they're coming in, I have a quick question for you. Did you use the same Kaizen event to drill down further in your process? So for example, you had account management, you had the request fulfillment process there for account management, add, remove. Did the same Kaizen event, did you use the same Kaizen event to detail the process, or did you take that outside of that?
So the Kaizen event for us did detail, once we defined the work types, the team was then tasked with what information would you need to know to make sure it gets triaged to the right resources. So the way we described it is this event essentially defines the work and dropped the package at the door of the right resource. So that's what this event has done. We are now starting to look at the fulfillment by that work type. So for example, I've done some work, not a Kaizen, with the EWA or Enterprise Web team to look at the web requests, how those come for them, how well they're fulfilling them, how long it takes, that kind of thing. So we have not done another Kaizen event on this particular topic, and I don't anticipate it because once we start looking at those individual fulfillment flows, I don't think any of them are big enough for full Kaizen. They'll probably just be addressed individually just through lean thinking and some PDCA and some DMAIC projects.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, we got some questions coming in now. So first of all, I want to mention Jeff said that this was easily the most valuable information session that he's attended in years. So just a wonderful job. I think that echoes the sentiment of everybody here in today's event. First question here is from Beth. She says it seems that that you know about the value of Lean, IT, and Kaizen before tackling this problem. What should an organization do if they don't have that foundation?
It's a great question. And there's multiple ways to start. I will start with making a suggestion how not to start, which is to not read a bunch of information and understand it and try and go do it. I strongly suggest there's various trainings. LEI has very relatively inexpensive, they well, certainly have webinars, but they also have different training events that they do that are not part of conferences. You can read about it and learn to a certain extent, but try and find either a certification or a group or some way that you can actually apply and learn the information. We're spoiled here at RIT because CQAS, the Center for Quality Applied Statistics, does certifications. But everywhere around you, there should be some lean organization. I would try and attend some of those certifications classes because they should, if it's a quality class, it will involve you practicing the skills that you need. So you can get an introduction to the information, but then try and find some way that you can get some hands-on learning. I have found the nice thing about lean people is we all know things can get better. So we all generally are happy to share and help each other. So it's a pretty welcoming community. So I would look for some access, again, to some information, but really try and find somewhere where you can get some experience and some classroom training or webinars or something that engages you to start to apply the thinking. Of course, you can always find lean leaders somewhere in consultants' places, but I think there's enough information out there and access to different ways you can get the practice.
Sure, resources. Community is always a good resource. I see Mary has a raised hand. I've never done this before, so I'm going to take you off Mary. Mary from Princeton. See if that works. Go ahead and ask your question. I'll give her a few minutes to respond.
Okay. Oh, can you hear me now?
Is this Mary? Yes, go ahead.
Great. I was just wondering, so I was, overwhelmed by the 1,100 items that you first identified, and I just wanted to get some more clarity around the training session that you gave to your team at the beginning, and then the homework that you gave them where they identified the types of work going on in ITS. Did everyone work with customers, or what were the parameters that you put around that so that people could get to the right level of detail in identifying those types of work?
So the training I referred to, for every event, we do some very fundamental training into lean thinking and what waste is and what's expected of them in their role. So that was the primary training I was referring to. For this group, you're right, it's a daunting list. I knew we needed to identify the work. So to answer your first question about detail is we started just some discussion and sort of brainstorming as a group and said, well, let's name a few things. And that's where we came up with, well, installing hardware, that doesn't help anybody. What does that actually mean? So we had some general conversation just to help clarify what the intended level of detail is. It was not intended to be completely prescriptive, nor was it going to be perfect. So we did have conversations as a group with them understanding what the objective was as to what level of detail they best thought would be appropriate. In terms of who they were reaching out to, the way I described it to them was you can talk to whomever you want that's going to help you gather this, help and contribute to this list, but you have to make sure you at least talk to your team that you're representing, your people that you're representing, because with that we don't want to miss anything. So there was not a restriction or a limitation on who you can only talk to. It was be sure you talk to these specific groups. So it was, again, and different people did it different ways. Some people, like I said, had a meeting. Some people had discussions. Some people just said, send me everything you've got. But there was no restriction. It was more of, you have to make sure you talk to the folks you're representing. And if you think there's somebody who's not represented in this room and you want their voice to be heard, please go talk to them, or make sure somebody does go talk to them, because we want to just cast a wide net to get as much as possible. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you very much.
All right.
And I will say, I'll just add on real quick, Mitch, the 1,100 seems daunting. Here's the thing. But people want to be a part of something like this. It was not pulling teeth. It was, I mean, I was amazed we had 1,100. When you ask people, what is it you do and what is it you ask ITS to do, people are more than happy to participate because we often don't actually ask the people that do the work what they do. So it was very favorably received. And in the end, it was very educational for everybody. And it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, it makes sense. People want to be recognized for all the work they actually do, and the university, your university wants to know the actual work that you do. So always a good exercise. All right, Kelsey from University of Oregon asks, prior to the Kaizen event, had your organization done any other Kaizen events or been familiar with lean thinking? I think you addressed a little bit of this, but if you've got additional thoughts.
Sure. So when I first came on board, we had done one other Kaizen event before this one, and when I first came here, we needed a change management process. So we did a Kaizen for that, and that was very successful. That was a little bit different in scope because it was completely internally to ITS. So our change management process was getting essentially any work moved to a production environment was what we were talking about. So that was all within ITS. So we did have that under our belts. It was a positive experience, not only in the results, but the people that participated had a really great time. And they did tremendous work and they were recognized for it. So we did have one under our belt. We also, from there, we had some folks that were identified as wanting to get Greenbelt certified themselves. So word essentially started to spread. So it did make it easier to start and keep the momentum going with another event. And in the interim, again, we did different improvement opportunities, and I facilitated various other conversations and meetings along the way. So this was not the first, but we didn't have a formal, it wasn't we didn't have really a formal approach. In other words, we are not programmatic about Lean. We don't dictate everybody has to be familiar with Lean. We don't make everybody become certified or trained, which some organizations have done. It's just working its way through our system and just becoming part of the way we think about how we do our work.
Great. So we have 3 lesson learned questions, so I'll save those to the end. But Jerry from Boston College asks, this is a tool question. She wants to know if Footprints allows you to route the individual requests based not just on service, but the type of work that they needed for the service.
So I will be honest, I don't have the answer for that. We are in the process of looking at other tools to better support our system. So I don't know. I do know there are some challenges we have, and I'm not sure if it's with the tool or how we implemented the tool. It does not fully support, from my perspective, process fulfillment thinking, but that's very common if you're not really thinking about what we call value streams or the processes. Generally, a system is not implemented with that in mind. So I apologize, Jerry, I couldn't answer the question directly, but that would be something we certainly need to look into in terms of fulfillment and determining what the best way is to get that information.
Okay. Josh from Michigan Technology University asked, did your Kaizen address the multiple pathways that your customers were using to submit a request?
So it did. So we knew beforehand, based on what we called our request source, for the most part, how people were requesting work. And it definitively, one of the objectives you may not have noticed, but we had to eliminate direct emails to people in certain organizations. And it did eliminate that. We had a massive communication undertaking, I say massive, but very broad. We actually ran a report to see how many people had submitted, I believe it was 10 or more tickets in a year. And those people received communication about, here's a new way to submit your ticket, here's how it works, here's the work request page. So we shifted from multiple ways. We now primarily have going to the service desk, we have the work request pages, and then they still can email, and that creates a ticket. I think they send an email and it creates a ticket within Footprints. So we've been able to definitely reduce that variation. And that was one of the concerns that people had was, will people actually use this new system? Well, the reality was it's so much faster to get that work request to the actual recipient that once people experienced that, they were more than happy to continue with it. So yes, we were able to eliminate many of those what I'll call miscellaneous or distracting methods to be able to reduce it primarily to just email tickets and work request and triage and stopping by the service desk.
So you're able to minimize reaching out to that favorite IT guy, right?
Exactly. That was one of the things the directors wanted. Can you please protect my people?
Yeah,
because
exactly.
they needed,
Strange,
they needed to do, yeah, exactly.
So Sandeep is asking about what are your lessons learned in defining the different fulfillment groups for your requests? Any guidelines you could give us?
Meaning the people that receive the work, the fulfillment groups?
Yeah, it sounds like that the various groups are responsible for the request fulfillment.
Trying to think, we really didn't have a lot of challenges with that, so it's hard for me to think of lessons learned because in the end, you know, customers are requesting the work. Well, maybe this is one of them. So customers are requesting the work, and the people that fulfill the work want to do that for the customer. One of the challenges, I think, was having the ITS folks really think about what do you actually need to know when that request is made so you can do something with it. Because there's a balance between providing no information, which means you have to call the customer, you're going back and forth, or providing all the information, but maybe the customer doesn't know all that detail. Maybe it comes later in your workflow, or they simply aren't ever going to know it. So that was something probably a little more thought ahead of time, you know, could have been really thinking about when you get this work, what do you actually need to know, no more, no less, to help move this forward. And that was a little bit of a challenge in some ways. We've certainly worked through it, but there was a little bit of a sticky wicket there on day 2 for a little bit.
Okay. These last 2 questions, one is from Adam from Princeton, and another one, both are lessons learned. So the first one's asking, what are the victories that you've seen as a result? And Adam's asking if you would do anything differently, or you had a chance to do it over, what would you do?
In terms of victories, couple of things. One is we can now run every month and understand exactly how much of our work is what type of work. So I can tell you 28% of our requests are account management requests. I can tell you 85% of those are RIT computer account requests. So we actually have an idea right now of how the work and how much work is flowing through the organization. What was the second part again, Mitch? I'm sorry.
So Adam's asking from Princeton, he's asking if you had a do-over, what would you do differently? Groundhog's Day, what would you do differently?
Yeah. Probably what I would have done differently. The work itself was very successful. And again, as I said before, we now can see the work and we know how much of what type of work we're getting. I think what I would have done differently is making sure, not changing the work, but making sure it was clear to everybody, sponsors understood, but across ITS, you know, this is very much the tip of the iceberg. The other piece that I may not have clearly articulated is in 2.5 days, right, we designed all this work, designed, you know, the processes, all the data that was needed, all the different details of workflows for the subcategories. There is work to be done afterwards, and one of the hardest things for a Kaizen is the work that you have to do afterwards, and making sure that it's sustained. So that always, it's one of those things, no matter how much you talk about it, it certainly, there's always more to be done than people expect. So that might be partly because we've only done 2 at this point, but I probably would have been much clearer about what the broad and full picture is, as opposed to what we were doing in the event itself. There were some people that thought we were going to fix everything, like literally design systems in that time frame, and that was not what we were going to do. So I probably could have communicated that better.
So we have about 2 more minutes, then I'll do some final thoughts and how to get the recording afterwards. I'd have a quick question. Your this project, you've defined your requests and now have a request process. Have you know the number of requests that are coming in? Have you looked at the ones that are kind of like the least popular and thinking about in terms of ending life them or replacing them, or asking if they're still valuable?
We haven't done that yet. We haven't circled back, and part of what we're doing now is trying to decide where do we want to focus next. So now that we can see the work, so for example, and some of the things that are infrequent, we have not found anything that we would no longer do. Doesn't mean that certainly as we retire systems and things like that, those subcategories go away. But we're now more at a point of deciding where do we want to go next in terms of looking at all of these. Something that's infrequent could take us a tremendous amount of time. Hopefully this will help us then be able to drive towards service level agreements. And if we understand our current metrics, then we can understand what we can tell our customers to expect, that kind of thing. The work with EWA was defining what their fulfillment metrics are. So for example, theirs was first contact resolution, when it gets to you, and then did you resolve it same or next day? That's not going to be the same as an application request. It might be an enhancement to PeopleSoft. Guess what? that's not going to be done the first time they hear about it, and it's not going to be done the same or next day. So now we're starting to think about what metrics describe the performance of each of these different types of work, understanding now that they're all very different. And it may be as we do that, Mitch, it comes across, there may be some that we don't need anymore, but at this point, they're all staying.
So you're looking at like service level targets for each of those requests.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, again, Sarah, thank you so much for doing this. I just want to remind the group here that the transcripts and recording will be available within 5 business days on the EDUCAUSE wiki site. As soon as we're done with this, I'll go ahead and upload it to YouTube so I can get that posted. This was a great presentation. Again, thank you everyone for spending some time with us, and thank you, Sarah, again for presenting for us. At this time, I'll just say goodbye and thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you, Mitch.
Okay, bye. Bye, everyone.